So card scrapers, card scraper magic. That's what I entitle this seminar as, is magic, because I tell people it's kind of like my parlor trick. You know, I can put a burr on something and make a nice shaving with a scraper, and people are just, oh my goodness. It it's a trick to put those on. Yes, Mitchell, let the magic begin. And it really is a trick. It took me years to come up with a method that really worked for me. And I fought with it for years because I was missing one essential part. And when I got my card scrapers originally, this is 40 plus years ago, um, I got them from Woodcraft back when Woodcraft was, I had a little catalog that had about 20 pages in it. And it was revolutionary because me being in central Minnesota, I could all of a sudden get tools that just weren't available anywhere else. And one of the things I got was a card scraper, and it was a Sandvik card scraper. They had one card scraper, and I'd read about them. So I ordered a card scraper, and boy, right out of the bag, I got a burner on it, and it worked really well. And it took me literally years to get back to that. And I would go through the directions that they had about, when the burr gets bad, to sharpen the edge, to get the old material off and sharpen the edge and put a new burr on it. But what I didn't understand is that you have to be very more aggressive than trying to get that work hardened metal off that edge with just your sharpening system. And this is the whole deal here, is this nice little piece of steel. It's relatively easy once you understand what the mechanics are of this edge, how to go about getting this edge. And the slide shows the basic kit that you need for getting a good burr on a scraper. You need a burnisher. Burnisher is really important. You want a burnisher that's polished. It should be nice and slick, and it's got to be hard steel. My first burnishers were a variety of different things. One that I found that worked very well for me was a push rod from a Chevy V8 engine. Being an old hot rodder, I had a few of those laying around, and I tried them, and they worked really well. I also used a 10-inch or 12-inch snap-on Phillips screwdriver for a long time because it had a handle, it was polished, and it had hard steel. Those are the tricks. They need to be polished. The burnishers that have serrated edges, those are probably okay for kitchen knives, but they won't give you the edge you need on here. You have to glide smoothly across that material. If you have a serrated edge or even a dull edge, something that isn't polished, if you look at that microscopically, it's got all kinds of lumps and bumps on it, and it just grinds that edge right off. So it wrecks your beautiful burr. Has to be hard, has to be polished. This is a Swiss made. It's the one that's in the slide. Excellent. Lee Valley makes an excellent one. Theirs is oval on the end of it. And the benefit of that oval is not for card scraping. It's for pulling the burr out when you're sharpening carving gouges, because you can lay that burnisher inside the gouge and roll it right out, and it'll pull that burr off. A lot of people use a stone to get that burr off, but what happens is they give a back bevel to that gouge over time if they're not careful. And a burnisher, of course, won't cut anything. You can pull that burr right out when you're sharpening it. So that's the benefit to the oval Lee Valley ones. But good quality card, a burnisher, sharpening system. Now I sharpen all my stuff with granite, sandpaper glued to it. It's very flexible. I can have a lot of different grits. I can run through those different grits really quickly, and it gives me a nice big area that I can work on things like a card and get it flat. And then you need a block of wood, something to establish the card on edge, and I'll show you what that's for. So that's the basics for your scraper, for your card scraper. And make sure you have that close at hand. When you're working on your bench and you've got some panels that you're flattening or a tabletop that you're flattening, you'll be able to roll that burr that you've created back and forth maybe 3, 4, 5 times before it actually starts to get dull and doesn't cut anymore. And if you have your sharpening equipment close by, You can put a brand new fresh edge on that card in under 2 minutes without any problem. I can do it in about 45 seconds, and I've got that burr ready to go again. But you need to have your equipment close by. If you have to walk across your shop and dig through a drawer to find stuff, it's just going to take too much time. You're not going to get the work you want. Now, here is the tool that really made a big difference for me. And this is where I first started getting my consistent burrs. After a number of years of messing around with it, I was just frustrated. I'd buy a card and it would work good for a while, and then pretty soon I couldn't get a good burr on it. And into a drawer it went, and I bought another card and tried again. And I just could not figure out. I read a couple different articles on how to get a burr. Then I read an article in an old book from the early 1900s on working in a woodworking shop, basically. I think it was maybe a school manual or something. It was pretty sophisticated. If it was for high school, it was pretty advanced. And they talked about hand tools a lot in there. And one of the things they said on a card scraper is you need to file the hardened material off the edge when you can't raise the burr anymore. And so I went and grabbed a mill bastard file and filed the edge, and bingo, I could get a decent burr again. And so I decided that I needed something that was more consistent than just chucking the card in a vise and filing across the edge. So I was messing around one day and I grabbed a piece of, well, this is the actual piece. It's a piece of elm that was got a knot in the corner of it out of my scrap pile, and made a groove through it with a table saw. And I took a fine file and put it in the groove and pounded a couple wedges in behind it so that it was at a nice 90-degree angle and locked in there good and tight. And it revolutionized how I could get an edge on my card scraper, because it would keep the orientation correct. There's, if you want to do a screen capture, that basically shows the dimensions that I used for making that. I'm set back about 1.5 inches from the edge, but it gives me a way of holding that card. I can lay it on that file and I can pull it towards myself and cut. And it gives me great control. I keep it flat, 3 or 4 passes. And the first pass on a card that you've used quite a bit, it just kind of dances and skips over the top of that file, because working that metal back and forth, when we turn the burr and we pull the burr back up and we turn it again, we're working that metal back and forth and we work harden it. It gets really, really hard on the edge. We have to cut that metal off to get back down to the original hardness of that card so that we can put a burr on it. And when you first pull it across that file, it just kind of skitters across because it's not really cutting. It's really hard to steal. So hold it firm against there, pull it back, and by about the 3rd or 4th pull, usually you're going to find that it has a good grab all the way across. Make a couple of passes at that so you really cut the material down, and now you're into the soft metal. Fred asks, what is the purpose of the triangular burnisher? Well, to wreck a perfectly good burr, honestly. The triangular burnisher. I'm not sure why they're triangular. I really don't know. You can put more pressure, I guess, on that edge, being that it's triangular, but I don't know. I've used the round burnishers ever since I first started messing around with burrs with cards, just because on a very early article I read, they said to use a round burnisher. So that's what I've been using. I had a triangular burnisher around here for a while. It probably still is around here someplace. I haven't messed with it in many, many years. I got it. I didn't intentionally buy it. I got it in along with something else, and I didn't find it was necessarily a valued thing. I think it just can cause some problems. Dean, do you start with the burr up on this jig? Not sure if I follow you with that. Do you start with the burr up on this jig? No, the burr is, well, you got burrs on both sides of the card, so it really doesn't matter. If that's what you're talking about, you're going to lay the card on there and drag it back, flip it over and drag it back on, and just cut that. I usually flip it in between just so I don't cut a taper on it, because I probably pull more on one end than the other. But no, just lay it on there and file it off. And that's what we do, is just pull it back. But when we get the card, and first of all, high quality card is really important. This is Tom Lee Nielsen's 20,000th card. I like a 20,000th because it's really flexible. It's easy on my hands. Over years and years of working with my hands, I've damaged them some. There's a little bit of arthritis in both hands. If I use a real heavy card to get that radius that I have in there, it can get to be pretty hard on my hands. Now, a heavy card is a little easier to put a burr on because it doesn't want to flex away from the burnisher when you put it on. But if you spend time with this, you'll be able to get a good burr on it without any problem. And a lighter card is very, very easy to get the camber on that you want. So good quality card. And like I say, is in my estimation, Lee Nielsen makes the best ones out there. And they're available in a kit. You can buy a pair of them. You get a 20,000 and a 40,000 cents. So you have both the lighter card and the heavier card. It's a good way to start because then you can decide what your preference is. If you'd rather have a heavier card that's just a little bit easier to put a burr on, or a lighter card that's easier on your hands. And you can get a good burr on this card without any problem. But when you get the card, it's going to require some tune-up because these are cold rolled steel. They are not machined. So you are going to have to flatten it off. And Dean, you wrote, so the burr doesn't dig into the wood. Yeah, when you're laying it on this piece, like I say, this one I've been using for about 40 years. You know, they say there's nothing more eternal in the woodworking world than a temporary jig that works because you never replace it. This was my very first one. This is actually as old as my youngest daughter, and she turned 40 this year. So this thing is 40 years old. And there's no groove here. That burr is so fine. It's just a really tiny burr. And the first couple of passes you make, that burr is gone. And maybe if I got a microscope down there, I could see something next to the file. But this is a what would you call it? A master of disaster tool. It cuts that edge off aggressively. There's nothing, no finesse about it. It just does the job. But when we get these tools, these cards, they're a little bit lumpy. We need to flatten them down because the whole theory behind how a card scraper works is you have three absolutely flat surfaces. In other words, this side is flat, this side is flat, and the edge is flat. It doesn't necessarily have to be 90 degrees to the face. That's not critical. What it has to be is perfectly flat and perfectly flat and perfectly flat, or as close as we can get them. When we have these sides polished up and we get this edge polished up, you have a knife edge in between those two surfaces. Then we just have to learn how to roll that knife edge over slightly so that we can use it without damaging that sharp edge. That's the trick. You know, people can put burrs on by clamping this thing in a vise, getting on there, their burnisher and just really pushing. Yeah, you can get a burr on it. But if you got a microscope on that burr, it's going to be all cracked and broken up and fissured, and it's not going to last very long. It's going to break, those pieces are going to break off, and pretty soon you don't have a burr there anymore, and it's just a mess. Then you got to try to work on getting it back. This whole process relies on making sure these sides and the edge are flat and finesse in putting that burr on. There's no brute force in this. This is all finesse. So when I get a card, the very first thing I do is I get on my sanding surface and I flatten the sides. Now you can just literally, like I have in the picture, put your fingers on that edge, work it back and forth and flatten it. Do the same on the other side and get it down flat. With a less expensive card, you'll really see the lumps, as you can see in that picture. That was probably the spacing on the roller or something, you know, that's definitely roll marks across there. And you want to eliminate those roll marks. You want to get it down to where it has a nice edge like that all the way down. And this one, I've got both edges worked on it just because I was using it as a demo. I only use one edge on my card scraper. This other edge here, I round these corners off significantly. I take them down. I round all this edge off. I round around the ends because my hands are all over this thing when I'm working with it. I don't want sharp corners. I don't want razor sharp edges because I'm going to bleed if I do that. And blood stains are hard to get out of wood. So I want this really comfortable to hang on to. This will be my cutting edge. It would be like having a, a plane blade that you got sharpened on both ends. When you're handling it, it could be a problem. And we handle these things all the time. So one side is good enough. I put a burr on either edge, either side of that edge. I can use those burrs. I can roll them back and forth 4 or 5 times. If I get 5 times out of each side, that's 10 burrs that I have out of one sharpening. And like I say, it takes me under a minute to file that material off and hone it and put a new burr on. I can do a decent sized tabletop with one sharpening. So it's not like, I need this side because I'm taking too long to sharpen them. No, that's not a problem. If you're that worried about it, get something like this where you've got a whole bunch of card scrapers in it. And then you can, and by the way, Lee Valley makes this. This is something you can hang on your workbench that's full of cards, or a good place to store them. And it is nice to have them in a pocket. People tend to throw them in a drawer when they're done with them. Well, that's like throwing your chisels in a drawer. You're going to put dings in that edge, which means you have to get those dings out if you're going to use it. You want that edge to be precise all the way through. So we're going to start flattening the sides. And on the sides, I probably go to 800 to 1,000 grit paper, which is, 2,000 grit Waterstone, something like that. They don't have to be as fussy as the back of a hand plane, because this tool, putting the burr on it and stuff, you're not going to sharpen this edge. You're not going to sharpen it that sharp all the time anyways. So that's going to be the determining factor, this edge, as far as if you have any little serrations in the edge. And again, this is a tool where the majority of it is just a sandpaper replacement when you're working with it. So you're going to work away and get it down to where it's level and it's flat. And again, a pencil that's your tool right there. That's going to make working with a card scraper easy, because you're going to lay it on its side, scribble all over the board. Then you're going to come in with your card scraper and you're going to scrape all those scribble marks off. When you get down to the last few passes, well, now you can take a scraper and sharpen it razor sharp. I mean, get all 3 of those surfaces to maybe 1,500 grit sandpaper, carefully roll a burr over and go back and just make light passes and take out any little scratches that you have. And scratches is the wrong word, any little ridges that you might have. Because what happens when that burr starts getting damaged is it doesn't leave grooves, it leaves ridges, because it's areas where you haven't cleaned the wood off. And I've got a solution for that beyond getting them super sharp. What I do is I reverse direction with the scraper. Instead of pushing it away from me, I pull it towards myself. I don't put any camber in it. I keep it just flat, and I pull it towards myself, and I just go diagonal across the board very lightly. And what I'm doing is just shearing all of those little ridges off. And you can end up with a beautiful finish with a card scraper that has a 800 grit edge on it. You'll be just fine. But we need to get it flat. Those 3 surfaces have to be absolutely flat. Now, one little trick, if you've been using your card for a while and you just can't get that burr back on it, and you file the edge and clean up the sides, and you go back and you just can't seem to get the burr that you want, not a very good burr, take an indelible marker and right along this edge on the side, make a black mark on both sides. Now go over to your granite sharpening or whatever you use for sharpening, lay it down and very carefully make a couple of passes side to side. Now take a look at it. And I would bet that you're going to find you have a very tiny little black line all along that edge. Tends to happen when we're flattening the side. If we pick it up a little bit, scrape it, we take a little bit of material off, doesn't take much. And we're finding that we are not getting all the way to that edge, getting it straight. And if you're 2/1000 of an inch back from that edge and it's not getting that edge when you're flattening the side, you're not going to get a good burr. It needs to be flat all the way out. So block of wood is a nice thing to do on it. And away you go. What grit sandpaper on your block? Yeah, that one right there, when I started out, that's probably 180 grit. I'll go real quickly just to knock it down, see where I'm at, and then follow your grits all the way through until you get up to, I don't know, 1,000, 1,500 grit, whatever you want to do. Okay, how do you flatten the edge? Wood block to hold, or do you use the file jig too? No, that's the next thing. Okay, we get the sides of it flat. Now we're going to work on the edge. And that's what the block of wood is for. The block of wood is going to keep this scraper in the correct orientation on your sandpaper. If you were going to try to do this by hand, of course, you're going to move around a little bit. And when you move around, you're going to round that surface. And in essence, you're going to kind of clip those edges so they don't work as well. This block of wood allows you to move around on your sanding surface, so you're not digging a trench, whether it's in sandpaper or stone, you're not digging a trench. Keep moving around. You're going to have lubricant on here. When I work with sandpaper on granite or glass or whatever you want to put it on, I use camellia oil as my lubricant. I've got numerous bottles of camellia oil around because this is what will make that sandpaper last. It won't damage the sandpaper at all. It just lubricates it so it cuts really well. And you can see in that screenshot there, that paper is well lubricated. I've got camellia oil on it, and I move the block around and I work it back and forth so that I'm cutting that edge. In other words, the block is stable and I'm running it past the side of the block, and I work this edge down until it's clean. I've filed it already. Now I'm going to work the marks off. And typically on my bench, I'm going to maybe 600 or 800 grit on that edge. That's really all you need, except for those last passes. If you're, if that's going to be your final surface, then yeah, you want one card that you're going to have really, really clean on all three surfaces, and you're going to be very careful about putting the burr on so that you don't gall the metal on it so it just rolls it over, because that's the whole trick, is to roll that material over. So this gives you your chance to get it nice and straight, and then we're going to put the burr on it. And that's the whole trick, because we're going to pull that material up. Okay, now if you can think of I should have a whiteboard behind me, but if you can think of those three edges, they're nice and square. We want to pull that metal up just slightly. Basically, we're going to bevel it up, and that's where you can run into some problems too with not getting that bevel completely sharp. You're going to pull it up, just light pressure. And then when you put your burr on, you're going to come back and roll that whole assembly over. What it does is it reinforces the burr. In other words, you're going to push that material up, then come over and roll it back down, and that gives you your burr. So the way I do it is I lay my card about 3/4 of an inch in from the end of my bench. And I'm going to anchor my burnisher on the bench and on the card. That gives me just that slight bevel. And I'm going to sweep across that card. You want to sweep across. You never want to go straight back and forth. Going straight back and forth, you're going to gall that edge. Just imagine if this was soft clay. Say this is soft clay, which it is. I mean, in the metal world, this is fairly soft. But if this were soft clay and you put your finger on here and drug it straight across, what's it going to do? It's going to mound that clay up in front of your finger until finally it's up high enough your finger's bouncing over the top, or you're just grinding it along to get it through. Okay, if you take your finger like this and you sweep across, well, now you're rolling that edge over. So we always want to do a sweeping motion. So when we got it on the bench and we're doing that, we're going to sweep across that card. We're going to lay that card down and we're going to sweep across the card, not straight back and forth. This is important. It really is important. So sweep across that card. Notice the motion that I'm taking. See how that, oops, let's go back again. And we just, yeah, okay, we start up there. Pressure is at right by my thumb, and I sweep all the way down to the tip of that card. And you don't have to have heavy pressure. It's just 2 or 3 light brushings across there. Flip the card over, do the same thing on the other side, 2, 3 brushes, and you're ready to go. But anchor it on your bench so that you have that little bit of bevel. And then the magic trick comes, and that's putting the burr on the edge of the card. And this is the fun part. This is what really opens people's eyes. I take the card in my non-dominant hand. I've got it in my left hand here. I hold it close to my body so that I can control it. I'm going to take that burnisher, got it in my dominant hand, and I'm holding it like this. Got it in my fist sticking straight out. And I'm holding it so that I bend from my elbow, and it's just like I'm going to stab myself right in the chest. And just practice that, hold it, firm grip like this, and you're going to stab yourself right in the chest. and you're going to just bend from your elbow. That's important because then you can control it really well. You don't need a lot of pressure. You just need that control. So now we lay it on the card with the tip way out here, and then we make a pass all the way to our fingers. And again, a couple of degree angle. Here's the card. Hard to see in this little picture, but here's the card. We're going to start right out here on the tip. Little lubrication on this is really important. Every day that I'm using my card scrapers, I take a little bit of camellia oil, put on my burnisher, and wipe it dry. I want it slick, not oily, but I want it clean and ready to slide really nice. I don't want any just bare metal on here. So I lay it on here and I make a pass. That's all it takes. One pass. You pull that burr up. If it's sharp on adjoining surfaces, if it's perfectly flat and you've got that knife edge, one pass is all you need. Now, as you roll that burr back and forth, you might have to make 2 passes or maybe even 3 passes towards the end of that burr's life because that metal's getting harder. But don't get on those cards and just push. Just do the same pass 2 or 3 times, and that will keep pushing that burr over. If you push down hard on it and you feel it kind of judder, file that edge off. It's junk because you've galled the metal. You've piled it up and you've fractured it, and it's just junk. You want that thing to just glide like butter over the top. That's why we oil it. So again, with these slides, start at the tip, work your way to the end. So again, start at the tip and work your way to the end. And again, pivot from your elbow, keep it as flat as you can, and make that pass. It takes a little practice. At first, you're going to be all thumbs and just all kinds of weird stuff, But by holding that card like this and holding it close to your body, you have a lot of stability on that card. So the card isn't going to move on you, and you're going to make a nice light pass. That's why it's easy to put a burr on a 20,000th card. Some people have problems with it because they're used to really grinding on it, and what they do is they literally push the card away from themselves as they're running that burr, which means that they're getting a much heavier burr than they need, and you're going to almost have to lay that card down to find that burr. Not a good burr. The trick is to have a really tiny burr that's really sharp and at a fairly high angle. So like I say, there's 90 right there. I'm only a few degrees up from that, maybe 3-4 degrees, if that. Just enough that I'm rolling that burr over the edge. And by pulling that material up first, I brought a little material up behind, I roll it over, bingo, you've got it. And just, yes, Fred, just a couple of degrees, that's all. Greg, for wetting the sandpaper, is camellia oil better than mineral oil? Yes, camellia oil is a lot better than mineral oil. Mineral oil tends to load up more in your sandpaper, and camellia oil is really thin, light viscosity, and it won't hurt the sandpaper at all, not a bit. Dean, do you do the small angle on both sides of the card? Yes, I'll run my burr on one side, flip the card end to end, and run the burr on the other side. So I have 2 sharp burrs, one on either side of that card. And that way I've got 2 burrs that I can use. As I'm using them, I'm flipping it back and forth, finding sweet spots on the length of the card where it works really well. Like I say, my hands are all over this card when I'm using it. That's why I want this backside to be comfortable. I don't like cutting myself. I just don't. Like I say, blood stains are hard to get out of wood, especially maple. And then this is what you end up with, a card that can really bring nice shavings up. I'm going to show you how to actually use the card in slides here. Too hard for me to show at my bench, but you'll get the point. One of the things that is important, of course, is practice. Like anything else, we need to practice. And we can't just grab a card, throw a burr on it the first time, and away we go. This will get you to a really good burr, this system that I'm using, but we need to practice. We need to practice on decent wood. Hard maple is actually very easy to card scrape, and it's very satisfying to card scrape, and it's good wood to practice on. Just get a nice chunk of hard maple and start working on it. Pine, not so much. You really have to have a sharp burr to do a good job of card scraping on pine, because just the very action of using it, you tend to push the grain away from you. And if you don't have a real sharp burr on there and a nice edge, you just mush everything down and you really don't cut very well. So a good hardwood like maple won't kill your edge right away, and it's really a good wood to practice with. Now, holding the card, that's really important. And I tell people, okay, if you can see this image, put your middle two fingers together like this, all right? Hold your middle two fingers together, and then put your thumbs together on the back side. And that is essentially how you're going to hold that card. Your pinky finger and your index finger really aren't going to do much. They're going to be floating out there. You want your thumbs to be close together in the back. You're going to wrap your fingers around the front like this, and then you're going to induce camber with your thumbs. Your thumbs are what are going to push that camber. Why do we have camber in it? So we can narrow the area that we're working with. If we tried to scrape with this whole width without any camber, we couldn't do much because that's a really wide cutting edge. And to get that to hook into the wood, that would be tough. That's probably where the thicker cards are at their best, is because you can get a little wider shaving with them. But of course, it takes a lot more force. You know, this is just a little card. These are just our two hands. We don't have any inertia at all in this card. There's nothing. It's all what our hands are. So I like to have a card set up where I'm maybe cutting, an inch and a quarter wide, something like that. Inch and a quarter wide shaving, maybe an inch and a half. That's plenty. That's about as much as I can muster. Anything wider than that, bigger shaving than that, I just don't have the physical bulk to push that card scraper through there. And, I've seen lots of videos. I get a kick out of some of these videos on how to get a burr on there. Boy, they show, they're working this big burr on and they're getting these really big shavings. Yeah, it's good for a few passes. They don't show it 5 minutes later when that burr is completely gone. They show the glamorous big shavings. Well, if I want big shavings, I got hand planes. They're a whole lot easier to use as far as having inertia and being able to cut those big shavings. This is a sandpaper replacement. That's what this is for. This replaces sandpaper. This is not a dimensioning tool or a flattening tool. It is a sandpaper replacement. So grab it like this, fingers around the back, thumbs together. Takes a little while to get used to. Just remember, practice that. Put your fingers together in the middle, put your thumbs on the back of it. And that gives you that grip you're looking for. And, I exaggerate my pinky finger and my index, but you'll have your hands all over it anyway. You'll be doing stuff like, maybe I want to use this corner or this edge. Same thing, my thumbs are going to be together on the back side, but now I'm going to grab this way over in the edge. I'm going to pull most of my camber with the wider edge and get down in there and clean that area out that I'm working on. So you'll use that whole burr. You'll be back and forth across it, and you'll find the sweet spots on it, and away you go. And again, here's the way you use it. Your thumbs are together. You can see I've got a pretty exaggerated camber. The more exaggerated the camber, the deeper it cuts. We aren't going to have real deep cutting on this, parts of a thousandth of an inch, put it that way. It's pretty hard to get a real deep cut with these things, but if you put an aggressive camber in it, you might be able to see a slightly undulated surface when you're done. Fred, are you using mostly a push stroke? Yes, mainly a push stroke. There are times when you pull, and like I was saying, when I'm all done going over the surface, I get a raking light on it. I've gotten rid of all my pencil marks because, again, the pencil is going to be how you're going to track where you're working. Scribble on there, get rid of the pencil mark, and then you'll get a raking light across there to see if you have any veining, if you have little ridges on there. And if you do, now you're going to hold the card like this with your hands on the back side. You're going to pull it towards yourself. You're not going to put any camber in it. You're just going to pull it towards yourself, and you're just going to go over those surfaces diagonally. And what you're doing is you're cross-hatching it. You're taking those little veins off, and you're good to go. That's as clean a surface as you need. A lot of times I'm going to be sanding that surface just lightly, because if I'm coloring it, and I like using stains and dyes, and it's a real dense wood like maple, and I've sanded other parts of the piece. Say I'm building a table and I had to sand the skirts on it or the legs or something, when I glued it together, I got in sand, whatever reason I had for sanding part of it. If I were to stain and dye that with, say, a card scrape top and the other parts of it were sanded, you get a two-tone color out of it, because those sanding scratches absorb their place for the colorant to settle into, the pigment to settle into on stain, and they're an area where you have more surface area for dye, so they color more. So then you have to put sanding scratches in that top. Sounds terrible, but that's basically what you're doing. If you sanded to 240 grit or 400 grit, 320 grit, whatever, you're going to take a block and you're just going to put sanding scratches in that surface so that it colors the same. Now, I like using figured wood on little tabletops. You know, you find these boards that have really incredible grain in them, and they're usually short, odd-sized boards. Well, they make nice little side tables. Those I'll card scrape, and I won't touch them with sandpaper, even if I'm going to dye them or stain them. I'll let it be two-tone, because anytime you sand a surface, you get rid of some of the chatoyance of the wood because you've put little grooves all over it. And anytime you can keep a surface really flat like you do with a card scraper, you're going to realize more of that chatoyance. So yeah, it's always these compromises that we make. But okay, before we get on that, we'll talk just a little bit more about this. But the proper stance when you're working is really important too. My bench height is so that if I have a smoothing plane, if I've got a hold of a smoothing plane and I set it on the surface of that table, my forearm is parallel to the top of the table. That's what I use for an indication of height. That way, I'm roughly parallel when I'm planing a 3/4 inch or a 1-inch board, something like that. And that's really a good height for card scraping because my arms are pretty much parallel to the tabletop when I'm doing this. And I use my upper body as much as anything for card scraping because I get that hook in and I move my entire body forward when I'm scraping. Use your upper torso. If you're just sitting there with your arms, it gets to be wearisome. You know, you want to, just like you do in your hand planing, use your mass. Your mass is really good for pushing this blade through. Then it's more of a fact of just staying rigid. And this grip that I have where my thumbs are on the back, like in this slide, what you want to end up with is a straight line from your thumbs right up through to your elbow. And those thumbs are just rigid. You know, you're pulling back, you're pulling the camber with your fingers, not with your thumbs. Your thumbs don't move. You're pulling that camber back like this. Your thumbs don't move. What they are is just a straight line from that card right up through your arm. So it's much easier on your hands that way because now you can lean forward. You can use that inertia from your body to push that card through, and you're not killing your hands. You know, if you tried to have your hands over the top, well, they're going to flex away from you like that. You can't do that. If you're trying to push it, you got to have them around with your thumbs rigid behind. Then you're driving that card into the wood. And that's what makes the difference is that with your thumbs close together in the back, your thumbs are little pistons just pushing that card right into the wood, allowing it to cut. And it makes it so easy. You can scrape for a long time without wearing your hands out or getting your arms tired. You'll probably feel it more in your shoulders at the end of a day than you will in your hands and your arms, just from the way you're going to be working it. But these things are, I mean, they're worth their weight in gold. And that's why you buy the best you can. And again, Lee Nielsen, in my estimation, makes the very best cards. Lee Valley makes a good card, but I like Lee Nielsen's. I like the steel in it and how they work. They're the most expensive card out there, of course, and they're, I don't know, $10 a piece, $11 a piece, something like that. This one card would replace hundreds of dollars worth of sandpaper and save literally hundreds of hours, because I can create a pile of shavings that would take me 2 hours to create with a sander. I can make that same amount of, take that same amount of wood off a board in 30 seconds with a card scraper. They work so fast. They're so efficient. So, okay, William, please review the order of steps from new out of the envelope to ready to go to the tool. Okay, got the card. The very first thing we're going to do is flatten the sides. So we get this side and this side absolutely flat and polished. Doesn't have to be far. If you've got 1/8 of an inch of it polished, 1/4 of an inch of it polished, that's all you need. But you need it flat so you don't have any humps or dips in it. Because if that side isn't flat and you put a burr on it, that burr follows that, and you're going to have skinny burr, thick burr, skinny burr, thick burr. It's just not going to give you the burr you want. So flatten the sides. Take your file, even on a new scraper. I file that edge. Usually it only takes a couple of draws across there. I just want to make sure that I've got nice clean metal on it. Then I go to my block. Oops, go the other way. I'm going to go to my block and I'm going to straighten up that edge, get all of the file marks off of it. And again, 600, 800, 1000 grit. If you're really fussy about it, go to 1500 grit. But you're going to file that edge. Now you have 3 sharp surfaces. Flatten the sides, flatten the edge, and then we're going to draw that burr up with the burnisher. Again, drawing across the material, not straight back and forth, drawing across the material like that. Then we're going to put the burr on it. Hold that card on your non-dominant hand, close to your body. Make sure you have a good grip on that burnisher. And again, pivot off your elbow like you're going to stab yourself right in the chest. Just practice that. Just take that burnisher and poke yourself right in the sternum with the end of that thing. And just get that down. You're going to make that pass. Now you're going to lay it on the edge of that card and you're going to make that pass so that you use the whole length of that burnisher. Going straight back and forth, you're going to gall it and you're going to put lumps in it. Make that sweep and then you've got it. You're going to get beautiful burr on it and you're going to be off and running. Again, make the whole sweep, then practice and learn how to hold it. Put your thumbs together on the backside, fingers wrapped around the edge, straight line through your thumbs up to your elbow, and then just push. Anytime you need to flex your wrists or anything when you're working with it, you're going to lose the strength because our hands don't have that much strength to hold that card from buckling under. But if our thumbs are back there and they're locked into place, they've got a lot of strength if they don't have to move. And that makes all the difference. So after the edge gets a little dull, what do you do next? How do you roll the edges again? Well, when it gets a little dull, we go right back to this. We're going to lay it on the bench. We're going to roll that burr up. And again, this is really important to make that sweep across there rather than going straight back and forth, because what we want to do is just push that material back up where it was. That's what happens when these burrs go away. They aren't getting dull. They're just receding because we're pushing against them. We're heating the metal up a little bit, pushing against it, and we just undo what we did with the burnisher before. So we make that, we roll them back down, and then we go right back and put the burr back on. Takes 10 seconds to do, and you're up and running again. And you can do that, like I say, 4 or 5 times before that metal actually starts getting dull. And by about the 3rd time around, you're going to make a couple of passes. But again, don't push down harder, just make more passes. Pushing harder is not going to get you anywhere other than wrecking what you have on there for a burr. Making repeated passes, light passes, and I mean light. You know, I don't have 2 pounds of pressure on there. I mean, it's really light, and I just make a real light pass. You don't have to push down. That's why this works so well to hold it, is because I'm not pushing that thing out of reach. I'm just getting on there and I'm making a pass. If your 3 surfaces are done right, if they're perfectly flat, you've got a nice burr in between there and you're ready to go to work. And then when you roll it back and forth and you really can't get an edge on it, go back to the file off that work hardened metal, and it'll take 4, 5, 6 passes, you know, until it really starts to cut in. And once you cut in, you're off and running. You know, if I could get a close up of this file holder right here, you'd see that there's just all kinds of metal on here, because I really cut these things off. These are a consumable in our shop. You know, even cutting that much metal off, these things last for months and months and months before they get down so that they're so narrow that they're uncomfortable to hang on to, and then throw them in a drawer and save them because they're good stock for doing scratch stock and whatever you need, where you need a good piece of good high carbon steel. You got a nice little piece there. Now there was a question, different grit sandpaper on granite since changing to a number of grits, PSA water. I hold my sandpaper on my blocks with number 77 spray adhesive, and there is no switching out. When I tear it off, it's done. But I have 4 granite blocks, and I put sandpaper on both sides. So I have 8 different grits here. If you have 1 granite block, do 4 strips. You can do that. You reduce the area you have to work in, but this is not a huge card to begin with, so you're still going to have plenty of area if you have 4 strips of sandpaper across there, and 4 strips is plenty. You know, if you start 180, go to 320, jump up to 400 or 600 and go on up, you'll be fine. You can jump some grits in there, and um, that's what works. Up 3 questions. Greg, unfortunately, the way my chat is, I can't scroll back through the chat. So if you could just reiterate what you're asking, that would be great. Can you feel a burr? Yes, you can feel a burr, but the way you're going to have to feel a burr is drag your thumbnail across it, because you feel it like this, you really don't feel a burr. I mean, you know there's a sharp edge there, but it's not like you can feel a burr. If you actually want to feel it, take your thumbnail, go across that edge, and it'll catch on that edge as it gets up there. That's how fine that burr is. Do you scrape between finish layers instead of sanding to remove buildup of blemishes? No, I typically don't scrape between finish layers. I'll sand with a block between finish layers, simply because I don't have the control in some instances that I want with a card scraper. You could do it, but I think it's maybe a little aggressive. Yeah, I use sandpaper, because the next coat of finish is going to fill in any little sanding scratches anyway, and emulsify with what you have there already if you're using the right finishes, which are solvent-based finishes, and it'll be just fine. Greg, do you have any tips on sharpening the edge and rolling the burr for curved scrapers? Yeah, it's the whole same scenario with the curved scrapers, these gooseneck scrapers. You're going to, again, flatten the sides of it and just work it around. You can use a block on these to keep the surface flat. And when you're rolling that edge, let's see if I can grab my block here. When you're flattening that edge, you're going to use your block on the sandpaper, but you're going to rotate the scraper like this to clean up that edge. This is on the granite, and you're just rotating the card like that. You don't worry about the inside, because you don't use the inside. You're only using the curve on the outside. The inside, the concave curve, it really doesn't do you any good unless you have an exact match to the surface. Then you're still only working on one tiny point. You can use a flat scraper for that. But work it around. Then when you put the burr on, it's a little bit different there, in that you hold the card again in your non-dominant hand, but now you're going to put the burr on in very short little segments, about 1 inch at a time, all the way around there, and just work that burr up. Flip it around the other side, and again, short segments, same angle, but instead of trying to do a whole sweep, you're just going to do about 1 inch at a time, work your way around, and they work great. Okay. Any questions on card scrapers? We're going to go to another scraper that's different than a card scraper, but again, something that is really incredibly useful in our shop. Let's go to that. We're running through our time here pretty fast anyway. So let's get up to this little baby right here. This is a number 82 Stanley scraper. And I ran across this just kind of by accident. I was actually looking for a Stanley 182, which is the bevel up plane, the low angle bench plane. And I just accidentally typed in 82 instead of 182. And this thing popped up, and I looked at it, and I thought, paint scraper, didn't know Stanley made a paint scraper like that. And I looked at it a little more, and I thought, I don't have one of those. So, of course, what do? You bid on it, and you buy it. Excuse me a second. Getting a little dry. So I got it, and I messed around with it a little bit, and I thought, well, that's pretty interesting. And then I did some reading on it, and it turns out that it uses the same blade that the number 80 cabinet scraper uses, and it's sharpened the same. And I've used one of those for years. So it didn't have it had a junk blade with it. So I put a new blade in it, and you sharpen this blade to 45 degrees. And then you take your burnisher, and just at a couple of degrees past that 45, again, you put a sweeping burr on it. So now you have a nice sharp burr on the back side of that scraper. You've got a long handle with a knob on the front. You set it down, and it's a pull scraper. scrapes when it pulls towards you. And because you have that burr on there, it cuts cleanly. And the long handle gives you that ability to easily find the sweet spot on that burr as you're pulling it through. Cleaning off glue. When you've laminated boards together and you have some glue smear on it, you don't go through and clean it up right away, forget about it or something, come back the next day. You got, the worst is when the glue has gone across the grain. How do you deal with that? Well, you try to scrape it out and it tears everything up. This will shear that grain off so you can get it down to the surface. Then if you use the right glue, which is either hide glue or tight bond original, with hide glue, you just take a little hot water and clean the glue out of the grain. You don't have any torn grain. If it is tight bond original, the red label, you take vinegar and saturate the surface, put a rag wet with vinegar on it, and it dissolves the glue that's in the grain, and bingo, it's clean. For leveling surfaces off, small surfaces, this is tremendous. For dealing with difficult grain, this thing is tremendous because you can really concentrate where you're working on with that knob on the front. And it also makes pretty darn good paint scraper, but it's much more than a paint scraper. This you could actually call a cabinet scraper because it will do wonderful work for you. And they're out there and they're available. Nobody's making a reproduction. You got to buy an original Stanley. You notice that hexagon casting right in front of the handle? That's what you want to look for because Stanley also made, and I think I have a picture of it in here. The one on the left is a genuine paint scraper, and it's lousy for scraping wood. It replaced, it also is an 82, but it replaced the original 82 when cabinet makers disappeared after World War II. This was not a tool. It was a good paint scraper, but not a great paint scraper. So they revised it, and it has an angled head like the original, but there's a spring in there. And what the spring is for is if you're scraping siding and you hit a nail, it's like the tip over springs on a snowplow. It allows that scraper to kind of flop and bounces over the nail rather than pulling it out or pulling it loose. And you can imagine what that does if you're scraping and you hit a pin knot. It does the same darn thing. So a good paint scraper, not a great paint scraper, and definitely not a cabinet scraper. But when you go to someplace like eBay to buy them, you're going to find 10 of those short-handled, maroon-colored paint scrapers for every one of these long-handled number 82s. And the long handle is what you want. We'll back up here a little bit and I'll show you some more about it. Now it has an adjustable head so that you can adjust it to find the angle that's comfortable for you. You're not looking for an angle that makes makes it easy to find that burr. That's not a big deal. What you're looking for is an angle that's comfortable for you when you have it on the work, so that you pull in a similar direction all the time. And you'll figure it out real quick. You'll experiment with the different angles and you'll find your sweet spot, and that's where you'll leave it. And every one that you get after that, you'll leave the same. I have 3 of these around just in case I accidentally misplace one. You can never have too many tools. But this is the way it works. It has 4 different spots that you can angle the head, thumb screw that goes through there. Some of the early ones just had a serrated edge there. Well, some of them had a serrated edge. I don't know if it's earlier or later. Serrated edge isn't as good as the individual holes because the individual holes lock it in place more substantially. I found that the serrated edge can, unless you really have it cranked down, it can move on you. And especially if serrations are well worn after many years worth of work. The big thumb screw is important. Sometimes you'll find them with bolts through them. They still work, but it means that they stripped out the thumb screw at some point. Makes it a little more cumbersome to use. But once you found that angle, it's still a very viable piece. And it's got a big hole in that thumb screw. That way you'll know it's the original one. And at first I couldn't figure out why it had a hole in it. And then the first time that I had it adequately tight and I went to loosen it up, I realized real quickly why it had a big hole in it. So you could grab a 16-penny nail and slide it through that hole. Now you had a wrench that you could release the tension on it real quick. So that's why it has a hole. So you don't need to have a pliers around. You have whatever you have on hand. Stanley liked doing that. It's like on a bench plane. The lever cap happens to be a really good screwdriver for releasing the big screw that holds the chip breaker to the blade. And it was designed that way. That's why there's that big wide slot in that screw, is so that your lever cap goes in there and you release that. That way you didn't have to have a screwdriver around to get it apart. And again, there they are side by side. Typically for a decent 82, one that isn't broken or messed up, all the parts are there. Don't worry about the blade. Most likely the cutter is going to be long gone. You can buy these new. There's several different sources for them. One aftermarket source, I can't remember the name of it, makes a real good high carbon blade for it, but any blade will work. Stanley's, you can still buy replacement Stanleys for these. But just make sure all the parts are intact. You want good, clean pictures of it. You'll pay somewhere around 40, 50 bucks for one of these. And it is, believe me, it is money well spent. I use these things virtually daily when I'm out in the shop. When I'm laminating stuff and working with stuff, I use these. They're just great for trimming stuff off, cleaning stuff up. They're a brute force and finesse tool all in one. How's that? That's a good combination. Okay, another tool that's favorite of mine. The number 80 cabinet scraper. Now that's the original Stanley, and the one that I've got here is a Lee Valley. And Lee Valley just calls it their cabinet scraper. I really like this. I've used the 80s for years, but I really like these because they have a longer sole. They've got a little more toe on them, a little bit longer sole, a little easier to register on the wood, and they set up so easily. You know, I like Lee Valley stuff. Good cutter in it, and they're cheap. These things are well, I don't know the exact current price, but I know they go for around 70 bucks. Now, the number 80s, you're going to find the old Stanleys. You're going to spend probably 40 bucks for one of those online, and you're going to put a new cutter in it, new blade in it, that's going to cost you $25 plus shipping. So you can see that you've quickly approached the cost of a brand new Lee Valley, and these things have a flat sole on them. They're set up really well. And that's important, to have a nice flat sole. If you find an old Stanley online, one of the first things you're going to do is flatten the sole. But these, it's all about getting that edge on that blade again. And you've got a thumb screw in there that induces a little bit of camber in the blade, just like we do with our thumbs on a regular card scraper. And that gets you where you need to go. The blade is just a real thin blade, sharpened at 45 degrees. Here again, I'm using my file holder. Now I've just got a block of wood that I've got a 45-degree bevel on. I lay the blade in there. I can drag it past that card scraper. Again, important, cut that work hardened metal off. It's only going to be on a little edge because that's where we're putting the burr on, but you have to scrape the whole face to get that edge off. So you scrape the face, flip it over, hone it so that you have that edge really cleaned up nice and polished. And again, the back side of that cutter, when you get it, just like we do with the card scraper, polish the back side of it. Have it completely flat and polished. Now we can put our bevel on, polish our bevel. We have a knife edge. In other words, on that 45 degree, we got it polished on the flat side. We've got it sharpened just like you would on a chisel. On the 45 degree, we've got a knife edge there. The way we're going to make that knife edge work for us is lay that scraper down on your workbench with the sharp edge, the pointy edge up. In other words, here's your bevel, here's the back of the scraper, you got the pointy edge up. And just make a couple of laps, again, sweeping over it with your burnisher, just to make sure you don't have any residual burr or anything that's moved up on that 45-degree edge. Now we're going to put our burr on it. And this, I couldn't figure out a good way to get a good photo on it, so I just laid it on the work. But again, I'm going to hold that card close to me, and it gets pretty small when you got it close to you. You're going to lay that burnisher on that 45-degree angle, and that's a good registration. Lay it on the 45, the tip. Having good light close by is nice, so that you can see when you're on there and you can feel it. Now you lift it up a couple of degrees and you make that sweep. Just make that nice sweep. At a couple of degrees past that 45, you've rolled the burr on it, carefully put it back in the scraper. The burr is going away from you. That's a push scraper. You're going to push it, and that's the direction you want the burr. And they work great. It's just amazing what you can flatten off with one of those. A lot of people will ask me, why don't I just have one of those instead of a card scraper? Well, those are really good for big flat areas. I mean, you can flatten off an area very quickly with it and it'll work really well. But they can't get into corners. They can't do small pieces very effectively. So you combine it with one of these. Actually, you start roughing it out with this, knock everything down, get it all level on small panels and things. Then you come into the card scraper, or you come in with the cabinet scraper, do the big area, then come into the card scraper to finish off the corners, and you've got it made. And again, let the pencil be your guide. You know, put pencil marks on an area, scrape them off, and you're off and running. Pencil is just really important in any of this scraping. So again, here's the way you're putting that burr on. You've got your nice 45-degree angle. You use the burnisher, you use that angle to get your registration, and then sweep across. Bert, method to register the blade in the cabinet scraper. I don't really have any method other than just experience. I know I can feel when it's on that burr, and I know pretty much when I'm holding a card and doing this, I know I'm at 45 just because I'm used to it. You know, that's a habit. There's 45 degrees. So I just go up a couple degrees from that and make the sweep across there. You get real good at it with practice. If you put too big a burr on it, it's going to cut aggressively and the burr won't last very long. You know you have too big a burr, so no problem. What do you think of the Veritas card scraper holder? Not much. The problem with the card scraper holder is that it doesn't give you flexibility in that card. You're working in one small area. I like to use the whole card, and I've got my hands over it, making the burr, you know, more aggressive, less aggressive by how much camber I put in it. I can use the edges, the corners. With the card holder, you got the middle, and that's basically it. So, no, I experimented one. It's the same thing with their burnisher. They've got a burnisher that's in a little holder, and you can drag it across there. It's just not the ticket because you need to be able to do that sweep. If you just can't get it any other way, I suppose it's a way of doing it. But no, I'm nice long burnisher. Use the entire length of it, and that's the bomb. And Veritas makes a really nice burnisher, and that nice oval burnisher that they've got. These things are just great. So there. Well, we almost made it in an hour, but that's a lot of information about card scrapers. And again, the nice thing about this is that next week, these are going to start popping up on the Woodworking Show's website, so you can go in and review it. So, you know, go buy yourself some good quality scrapers. Go get Lee Valley scrapers. Get one of their combo kits of the 20 and a 40, and then buy another 20 and 40, so you got a couple card scrapers around. It's nice to have them all squared up, polished, and ready to go, just in case you do run into something where you don't want to take that 45 seconds or 1 minute or 2 minutes to put a fresh burr on. You just grab another card and get back to work. Sometimes I'm so focused on what I'm doing, I don't want any interruptions, not even 2 minutes to sharpen something. I want to just keep going on it because of the level that it takes to make sure that it comes out right. So, but get yourself a couple of sets of cards, buy a good burnisher. And again, this is Swiss made, woodcraft product. Swiss made carving tools are excellent. I have those. Or a Lee Valley burnisher. Make sure they're highly polished and go to work. And if you can score yourself a number 82, go for it. Of course, after we get off here, everybody's going to jump on eBay and look for an 82. So the price will go up for a little while, but just be diligent and you'll find that you can buy an 82 for, you'll buy them for under $50 in really nice shape. I bought one last year that was virtually brand new, orange painted knob and handle on it. And it had the original blade in it. That blade had never been sharpened. It was virtually brand new. And I think I paid $36 for it or something like that. So they're out there. Just be patient. If you can't find one right away, it will show up. So, well, thank you, Mitchell. I appreciate that. Any other questions before we dive out of here? Nope. Okay. Well, thanks a lot for attending the woodworking shows. It'd be nice when we can be back live. But the great thing about this is we can reach people who don't have access to the woodworking shows in our normal years. So thanks a lot for joining me today, and I hope you enjoy scraping by.